Hey, this is Vu, and today I'm going to take a look at carrying on T side. When it comes to matchmaking, I think the majority of players have a tendency to be really good on one side and actually be pretty bad on the other because both sides require different skill sets. I think T side's actually the easier side to carry on if you know what you're doing, so you should definitely recognize what that skill set is. The first thing you want is good peeking and movement, which is your base that you can work on with all these other things. The second thing you want is good nade usage, and you also want a good recognition of what is a good and bad engagement. I think the third part there, recognizing what a good and bad engagement is where most people actually have trouble. A lot of the time people have a tendency to think that they need to take super advantageous engagements every single time. However, you should realize that a lot of maps are pretty heavily CT sided, so if an opponent gives you a 50-50 engagement, combined with the fact that terrorist sides have better economy and a 4v4 is generally advantageous to T sides, you should probably take that. If someone wants to give you a straight up aim duel, you're probably having an advantage in general, even if it's just a 50-50 engagement. So trying to get into these situations where you can get 50-50 engagements is part of what you're trying to do on T side. Part of the way you can do that is you can try and go to the same area of the map every round. Now the area you want to be going depends on the map, and it depends on how the map plays out. You want to look at an area where you can get some good 50-50 engagements, you can maybe get some great advantageous engagements, and also if your opponents don't give you any gunfights, you found some sort of advantage. If you go to an area where just getting map control doesn't really matter, and by getting control of that you don't actually have any advantage, it's probably not the greatest area to be going. Of course, full map control is important on T side, but I prefer myself to be going to the more important area because I want to rely on myself to try and carry my team. So Banana here on Inferno is a great example of that. Even if your opponents don't contest Banana, which they usually will, and you'll usually be able to get some engagements, you still have an advantage by taking top Banana control, and you put yourself and your team in a good position to actually win the round. So you want to be trying to do that as much as possible. Now to do that, I like to Molotov off car, and then you work on your movement and your peeking from there. Again, your movement and your peeking should be the base. This should be something that eventually becomes subconscious so that you're working on your nade usage, you're working on mind games, and you're working on recognizing and playing on small things that happen for the majority of the rest of the round. The recognition here is just that you want to be going and peeking angles where you're only peeking one angle at a time, because that's how you end up in 50-50 engagements, and that's how you end up in advantageous engagements. A great example of a terrible spot to be peeking out is long haul on apartments. Now, I'm not a huge fan of going apartments on my own on T side because I feel like getting control of this isn't somewhere you can work out from easily like you can Banana. So a great example of a bad engagement is right at the end here, right at balcony, because you're going to have to peek out multiple angles where your opponent is only exposing his head. He has the option to peek you or not to peek you. For example, from back pit here, the CT has a clear advantage, and if you want to get out, you have to peek towards multiple angles at the same time, which is exactly what the counter-terrorists want you to do. When you get in these situations, you actually want to be using your nades to actually isolate those areas and give yourself as much of a 50-50 engagement as possible, and a great example of this is actually middle. If you were to peek middle with no nade usage at all, you are peeking into multiple angles at the same time, and there's really nothing you can do about that. However, if you have smokes, you can smoke off one side, which isolates part of the disadvantage that you've got, and you could potentially throw a nade, or a flash rather, and peek out with it to try and isolate and mitigate the other disadvantage you have when you come out towards the other side of middle, and the player's already holding the angle, and there are a few angles that he can peek out from as well. So a lot of the time your nade usage is simply to isolate one side or one angle so that you can focus on another and force a 50-50 engagement. Mid is a great example of that, as is Banana. For example, if people throw smoke towards CT and spools, that is to isolate the players in sight so that you can focus only on that area, and you can try and force, again, less disadvantageous engagements, get peaks that are better for you and worse for your opponents. Now, past that, you also want to be recognizing the little bit of information that your opponents are giving you, and you want to be working out quickly on that. You need to be able to execute quickly on small bits of knowledge to force any sort of advantage you possibly have, especially on CT-sided maps. it tends to be a situation where counter terrorists can just hold weird off angles, wait for you to walk in, and if you don't use your nades correctly, or if you don't have any advantage or any knowledge, those angles will almost guaranteed get that first entry on you. So you want to use small tidbits that your opponents give you, for example, the way they throw a smoke, the way they throw a flash, or the way they've played on a previous round to give you the ability to get, again, more advantageous engagements. Really, T side is all about trying to get the best engagements possible, and CT side is as well to a certain extent. So this is why I recommend, for a large part, the reason you want to be going to the same area of the map the majority of your rounds, because you get an idea of the way your opponents like to play, you get an idea of the setups they like to run, and those small tidbits of knowledge, for example, the way they throw a flash, where they throw a nade from, for example, if someone's sitting behind fountain here and they throw a nade to the corner, you can see where the nade's coming from, you can recognize where that player's playing, and you can try and execute out on it. So again, on T side, a lot of the time it's about being aggressive enough to recognize or to execute on the little bits of knowledge that you get, being confident in your ability to actually take those 50-50 engagements and win them, your ability to peek angles one by one with crosshair placement on point to actually find the shots as soon as someone comes onto your screen, and again, your ability to recognize and force